Okay, so while that clipboard's being passed around, we're waiting on Chris, you said, to get here. I'm just going to introduce myself for those of you that don't know me. My name is Meredith. I've been with Rebecca and her company for about 2 years now. And my favorite thing to work with are dogs that have aggression, specifically to people and other dogs. That's my favorite thing to work with. And so that's why I chose this subject for my presentation, reactivity. And the dog that we're going to really look at in this presentation is one of my own dogs named Lennox. And working with her, in addition to clients' dogs and dogs at Shelby Humane, where I also work, have taught me a lot about working with dogs with this problem, in addition to all of the other like educational materials, that I've been able to soak up and learn from. So reactivity is my favorite thing to work through. And once you guys are done with that email list, we should have 4 emails, right? You all in the same house. So if there's 4 names on that list, you can bring it back up here and we'll get started. Thank you so much. And since this is such a small class, if you guys have a question, feel free to just perk up and ask me, okay? I'm not going to be upset if you interrupt me, all right? Okay. All right, so we're going to get started. I would love to first off define what reactivity is. I think that's really important, so we all know that we're talking about the same thing. And then I also want to try and speculate as to why dogs are reactive. I can never know 100% what a dog is thinking because I am not that dog. It's like me claiming I know exactly what you're thinking or what you're thinking, okay? So we can just speculate. And then we're going to talk about how to manage the reactivity. So trying to give you guys tips and tricks on how to start working with your dog through all of this. All right, so we're just going to define what reactivity is. Reactivity looks a lot like this. It's a pretty textbook depiction of what reactivity is right here. Barking, pulling, lunging at other dogs and people that you'll see coming out from behind the fence. So that's reactivity. And then this is also reactivity. This is not one that most people think reactivity is, but in my opinion, it is also a case of reactivity. So there's no barking, there's no vocalizing. There is lots of leash pulling and lots of like fixation there. So both of those are what reactive dog looks like, in my opinion. And so if we were to define it, I've copy and pasted 2 very long definitions that I'm not going to read through. I just kind of made my own concise definition. It's a overreaction to something in the environment. So like if I'm walking a reactive dog and I see another dog on the other side of the street that is acting very, very docile and friendly, and my dog starts to lunge and bark at it, in my mind I'm like, that dog is friendly over there. Why are you acting aggressively towards it? That dog did nothing to you. There's no need for you to do that, dog. That's what we think as the human, though. And so we have to try our best to get behind our dog's eyes and see what they see. And that's the hard part, that practice and empathy there. So I'm going to try and
consider reactivity when you say an overreaction to something in the environment being even something as simple as like a loud noise in the house.
Yeah, so
and them kind of freaking out about it.
Yeah, that's also an overreaction for sure, yeah. And that observation that you made is one that is not intuitive to most people. Most people don't overlay that kind of like over-exaggerated startle response to something so regular and routine as being reactive, but I think it definitely is. And all of the main points that I talk about, hey, come on in, take a seat, all the main points that I talk about today, I think can be applied to that kind of reactivity as well. But yeah, it's like an overreaction, like why are you feeling so intensely about this thing right now, right?
Scared?
Yeah, scared, anxious, fear of new things, skittishness, any kind of like exaggerated emotional response I would consider to be reactivity. Okay, a lot of people though just see it as aggression. So, but in my opinion, it can take lots of other forms. Okay, so then we have to start to think about like common triggers for dogs to be reactive. So this is a collage of a bunch of different things, and I wanted it to kind of be an overwhelming assembly of pictures because I want to underscore the point that there are so many things that dogs can be reactive to. Some of the most common things are other dogs, cats, bikes, strangers, delivery men, men wearing hats, men in beards, kids screaming and playing, leaves blowing in the wind or something. Those sounds that a dog just abruptly hears can all be triggers that dogs are reactive to. So from now on, whenever I say trigger, I mean the object, the thing that the dog is reacting to in the environment. Okay, so now we're going to start to speculate as to why dogs are reactive. Again, it's an educated guess. I can never 100% guarantee because I am not that dog. I think dogs are reactive because they are one of the four following things. They can be a combination of them all too. So they're hyperactive, they have xenophobia, they're impulsive, or they're anxious. I think dogs that are one or a combination of all these things tend to be more reactive than other dogs. And one of my favorite analogies to help you guys understand a reactive dog is talking about a sink. So when you have a sink, you have a basin, you have a spout that puts more water in it, and then you have a drainage pipe. Dogs that are reactive are ones that simply cannot hold a lot of water. It overflows. I call it emotional vomit a lot. So they take in so many things and they don't have appropriate stress coping mechanisms to let all of that arousal out. So the water overflows on top of the sink, and that overflow is all of these really explosive, over-exaggerated reactions to things. So when we train a dog, our main objective is to try and create more resiliency in them, and that's illustrated by a deeper sink basin. So you can simply take in more stimulus without causing you to overflow as much. And then it's also about trying to increase more drainage. So if you do get to the level where you're starting to have your basin be really full, what are ways for you, dog, to be able to let some of that stuff go so it doesn't come over the side and overflow in this really violent, chaotic kind of way? So that's kind of an illustration of the logic behind that, and it helped me visualize it more, and it helps me have other clients visualize it better as well.
Quick question.
Yeah.
In that environment, so like for example, Jessica and I do not have children in the house. Our lives tend to be fairly scheduled with work and everything.
Yeah.
So the dogs tend to be on a schedule.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of chaos in the house. There's not a lot of those things. So when we get them outside, or we get them in other places where it's different than that, is that actually creating some of the problem that they're having?
If you're recognizing more of a reactive or exaggerated behavior outside of the house, then yeah. And I think it's because there's more novel stimulus that they're experiencing. And the novel stimulus is analogous to the water coming out of the spout. So that valve is open full throttle when you're outside of your house in a more novel place. Yeah.
But because everything's kind of just calm and everything at the house, they're not ready for it.
Yeah, they're not as reactive because
So
that.
I should run around screaming. Got it. But I mean, I'm just
I see,
that's actually
yeah.
leading to the problem. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and we can talk more about the logic that you just kind of joked about just then. You're talking about kind of desensitizing them to it and having them practice taking in more stimulus that would simulate being in the natural world. Okay, regardless of the reason why dogs are reactive, they're all feeling stress. So us as their guardians, our main objective, should be how to help decrease the stress that they're feeling. If we can decrease stress, we're probably going to get a less reactive dog on average. So in order to decrease stress, we need to talk a lot about how our dogs' lives are every day. So in the animal welfare world, the 5 freedoms are something that all welfare staff are familiar with. The last 5 items, freedom to express normal behavior and freedom from fear and distress, are ones that I think private pet owners need to focus on more as well. And so I've kind of blown up those last 2 items of the 5 freedoms into the blue side of the 5 freedoms, which are 5 freedoms that all human beings are supposed to be able to have. And so it's important for reactive dogs to regularly be able to have a lot of freedom of choice. And by that I mean not forcing them to go one certain way on the walk, not forcing them to have to stay in their crate, not forcing them to have to walk on one leg or the other, because more of that confinement just increases the pressure on them. So I understand it's not always safe to let them make freedom of choices, because obviously they've naturally or learn to make more poor decisions, but when you can allow them to make a freedom of choice in a safe environment, regularly allow them to do that. I think that's really important, and we can talk more about ways that you can do that on a daily basis at home. Try not to overthink that point. All right, so I'm going to list some common things that can cause stress in a dog. So a lot of my clients say, my dog was fine 2 months ago, and now my dog has started this reactive behavior. So I'm just going to go through a list of things that in my experience cause a dog to shift from being cool to not being cool anymore. Adding a new dog to the home can definitely cause a lot of stress, which can cause more reactive behavior. Getting a new roommate, having a baby, change in the environment. Numbers 1 and 2 are actually changes in the environment, but I'm talking about sometimes getting new furniture, sometimes getting an extension added onto your house, having a different kind of HVAC system that makes a different noise. Reactive dogs are overly sensitive dogs, so any kind of minute changes in our environment can exacerbate that reactivity, because these dogs are like, oh my God, blowing this one simple change out of proportion. Getting older, so dogs that are around 2 years of age generally start to shift in their behavior. It has something to do with brain chemistry. Medical issues, so dogs that have chronic ear infections or arthritis can tend to be a little bit more reactive because they're a little bit more guarded about everything because they're in pain. Having new neighbors, so before you had a retired couple that were quiet all the time, and now you have a family with 5 screaming kids, or a family with 2 other dogs that run fence lines all the time, barking. An increase in activities in the environment. Some dogs do too much. So if you have a dog and you're like, I'm going to do all the enrichment, do 5 dog sports every week, that level of activity can be too stressful for them, and so it can cause more reactivity on the and output. So you got to try and be Goldilocks and figure out how much does my dog need every day and how much is too much. It's a lot like us, right? And then there's also a lack of activities in the environment. So my dog is in its crate 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, while I'm working. You can see why that would create some pent-up energy and stress and frustration. Environmental trauma. A lot of people that have reactive dogs had a dog that was okay, and then it got attacked by a dog at a dog park, and now it's not okay, right? And then it can be learned behavior. So you have one reactive dog already, and then another dog came into the house, and now that dog is reactive because that first dog taught the other dog, this is what you do in this situation, and that other dog followed suit. So these are 10 reasons why I have found a lot of dogs tend to become reactive. They're certainly not the only reasons, but they're the most common that I've found. Okay. So now I'm going to go through different types of reactivity. There's 3 main categories, and I'm going to go through all of them. So the first one is the frustrated dog. They're also coined as being frustrated greeters. So normally the frustrated reactive dog is going to start an interaction with a social behavior like a play bow, okay? So you're out on a walk and your dog play bows at another dog. After the play bow, the dog starts to get a little bit more rigid, more hyper-focused, leans forward, is a little bit more alert. And then it's looking at the other dog that it wants to interact with. Frustration builds because the dog is attached to a leash and it cannot get to the other dog. And so the dog starts to bark at the other dog and becomes reactive because it couldn't get access to the other dog. And so that frustration turns into aggressive behavior. And eventually that dog defaults to straight up aggression instead of a play bow, because it's like every time I see another dog and I'm on a leash, I never get to interact with it. That other dog always goes away. And so now when he sees a dog on leash, he's going to cue immediately to this behavior instead of this behavior at first, okay? A lot of these dogs have great interactions with other dogs off leash. The leash is the part that does them in, okay? So that's a frustrated greeter.
Mary,
Yes.
that is exactly what my 8-pound dog does to me in the evenings around 9 o'clock.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what to do. She gets, just like that picture,
The play
she'll
bow?
start the play thing, and then she'll get on my lap, and
Uh-huh.
she'll get in my face, and she'll paw,
Uh-huh.
and then she'll paw, and I'm
Uh-huh.
afraid because she paws me, it
Uh-huh.
hurts. And at that point, I don't know what she wants, and I don't know what to do. It's 9 o'clock, we're winding down.
Right. How old is she?
Year and a half,
Okay. Uh-huh.
and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I have older dogs, so I haven't lived with a young dog in a while. I have had several clients that have said that with their younger dogs, they kind of go through this witching hour where right before bedtime they start to tear up and have lots of zoomies and a spurt of energy.
Is that just an age thing?
Yeah.
Every night.
Every night.
Every
So
night
it might,
at 7.
yeah.
Right, it's like
7:30.
clockwork.
Yeah.
Do they
7
come,
o'clock.
like Sophie, she's sleeping
Yes.
till 9 and she wakes up and it's like, we're ready for bed. And it's,
Yeah.
Ours,
Really?
ours will jump up.
Wrestling match.
Will jump
Yeah.
up, start
Yeah.
barking
Oh.
at one another. 'Cause we got
Spurt of
2
energy.
them.
so it's natural then. Well,
I think it's a request for play or let's do something, and I'm frustrated, so I'm gonna keep poking you. Do it.
so she wants me to throw a toy or something.
She wants you to interact with her, I think. Yeah.
Well, last night I said, do you want to go to bed? And I gave her a treat, put her in bed, and she didn't say a word.
Well, that's good. And I love how, like, I just showed you a frustrated, reactive dog. The emotion your dog is feeling is frustration as well, a little bit. I have this energy need. Do it, Mom, do it. And you're like, it's 9 o'clock. I don't want to do it. And so she climbs in frustration. She might get more pussy and aggressive
And
about her
she
ass.
even looks at her father, who's sitting right here,
Uh-huh.
for approval. Does your dog do that?
They just,
They
well,
have-
we've got the 2 that'll start interacting, but a lot of times, we've got 7-pound dogs though, so.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, a lot of times I'll just play a little tug with them
Yeah.
or something
Well,
like
my
that.
husband's
5
been doing
minutes and
that.
then they're fine.
My husband's been doing that before she fell asleep at
Yeah.
8 o'clock.
Okay.
He plays with her every night.
Time to go to bed.
And then,
Tell me,
Yeah.
it's like, you didn't play with me today, so you better play with
Let's
me.
go,
Like-
let's go. Yeah.
Like clockwork.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's gonna get worse when she's 2?
No, I'm saying it happens a lot when dogs are around that age. So puppyhood to adolescence.
Okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
your dogs are around too, young
Chloe's
adults,
around
right?
a year and a
Yeah,
half.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
She's 2.5.
I was gonna say I have older dogs, so I haven't experienced it in a while. Yeah.
Like, we will actually go to bed and then our 18-month-old will jump up and he'll literally just start barking full force
Yeah.
in the other dog's face, and we're like,
Play.
really? You know, and
Yeah.
it's perfectly normal. They just want to play a little bit.
Okay.
All right, so now we're gonna get into the fearful dog. A lot of reactive clients have dogs that are fearful of the other dogs, which is causing the aggression. So fearful dogs, a lot of times they're the smaller ones. Smaller dogs live in a world of giants, so it is very much more intimidating for them. So they tend to have a lot of fear aggression. So you're walking a fear aggressive dog. The dog is taking notice of a dog that it sees in the distance, and then it starts to become reactive like this, lunging at the leash, barking. The moment another dog comes up to that fearful small dog, though, the reactivity kind of vibes less of a forward aggression like this into more of like an, oh crap, that just happened, I don't know what to do, right? Oh. And then if the big dog kept pressing, you'll get a dog that's backing up, which is what this little guy's doing right here, and then that's when you might get aggressive behavior. You might, like this big dog is probably going to get snapped at in a little bit if it keeps pressing, because this dog is fearful. It tried to scare the big dog away. The big dog didn't listen, so this little guy's negative emotional state didn't go anywhere. It's still there, and it's gotten worse because the bogeyman is even closer to him now. So at that greeting, you get a dog that will explode normally and continue to be aggressive. They're either going to continue to be aggressive or they're going to shut down, pee themselves, poop themselves scared. Okay, so that's the MO for a fearful dog. Okay, the predatory aroused dog is one that, again, will greet with, like, when they see the other dog, they're very intense, pulling forward. The difference is that you don't get a lot of vocalization. So you don't get a lot of the barking, you don't get a lot of the growling, you don't get the big aggressive display. You get more of a stealthy kind of stalking thing. Sometimes these guys will like make a little high-pitched whine type of thing, but it's less of a I'm going to intimidate you, get away. It's more of a I'm going to try and be really quiet and calm because I want to close distance because I want you. And then you'll get bouncing up and down a little bit. You'll get even more pulling straight beeline towards the thing that they want to chase. And normally the predatory aroused dogs, when they gain access to the other dog, they'll go into a mounting behavior. Because mounting is not just sexual, it's also an expression of intense arousal. And then you'll get this mounting dog will probably end up pinning the black dog down, and then you'll get a negative interaction here. And that's sometimes when a dog fight will happen. So again, the main difference with the predatory aroused reactivity is the lack of vocalizing. That's the hallmark for me, the lack of vocalizing. And that's what the dog in the red and white pity right here, this is more of a predatory reactivity, just so you can see it in action. So hyperfixation, lower body pulling towards one thing. The dog's in the fence, but no barking, right? Okay. All right, so those are the 3 different types. And dogs can be reactive, be a different type of reactivity depending on the trigger that presents. So you can have a dog that is fear aggressive or fear reactive towards people and predatory reactive to other dogs. You can have a dog that's predatory reactive to cats, fear frustrated reactive to dogs, and fear aggressive with people. It depends on the trigger. Okay, they're not just going to behave that way towards all things normally. Okay, so let's get back to where we were. We're gonna talk about problem solving now. So whenever we're working with a behavior problem, we're going to rely on management and training. Management is something that you could do today to decrease the frequency of the reactive behavior. Training is something that takes time, okay? Because it's going to be you working with that dog. You're essentially that dog's therapist. And if you guys have ever been to human therapy, you know that it's not magic and it requires a lot of work on your part. Management is something that you can relatively easily do, like in an hour, okay? So I like to hit home both of those. This is a common problem-solving step-by-step plan that I like to abide by for all behavioral problems. So we're going to apply this to reactive behavior. And this is going to be a combination of management and training throughout all of these. I'm going to use my dog Lennox as a case study for reactive behavior. She's one that I have most videos of. And this is a longer video of me talking through what I'm doing while I have her out on a walk, okay? So I'm going to play this video. And as I play this video, I'm going to remind you guys of these different steps, okay? Because I want you to try and apply these steps to you and your dog's problem. All right, and if you have any questions throughout the video, just holler and I will pause it. Okay, so step 1 is identifying the problem. So that's the first thing that I do here. Out at Buck Creek Park, walking my reactive dog Lennox. She's reactive to people and dogs and cars that slow down. She's reactive to sounds. Sounds as well. She's very, very sensitive to lots of things in her environment. Okay, so right there I have identified, number 1, I've identified the problem, okay? What is the problem with my dog? She's reactive. What is it that she's reactive to? understanding the triggers for your dog are vital. If you don't know why your dog is reacting to what they're reacting to, it's really hard for you to set them up for success and prevent it. So for example, if you don't know your dog is reactive to kids on bikes and you continue to walk your dog through the neighborhood where there's lots of kids on bikes, your dog's going to continue to practice that reactivity, and you can't avoid that or be more constructed in how you approach it. Okay, so the second issue is identify when and where the dog is doing the behavior. This is one that is it's a very important kind of dichotomy for people that have a dog that is leash reactive versus just plain old reactive. So for example, if your dog is only barking at other dogs and being reactive when it's on leash, but it's great at the dog park, that's huge. That means the reactivity is tied to the leash, right? If your dog is reactive and aggressive with other dogs at a dog park but great at doggy daycare, that's another important dichotomy. The environments are different, and the environment is causing a shift in the behavior. So that would make you think, what about this dog park is making my dog less successful? And it'll allow you to go further down that problem-solving tree, okay? You understand that one? Lennox doesn't really have a sensitivity. She's reactive to people and other dogs regardless of if she's on a leash, regardless of if she's at my house, a new spot, PetSmart, blah, 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 okay? So then we're gonna go into number 3. Think about why your dog is doing the behavior. That is that empathetic approach, kind of like what you were trying to think about your dog. Why is she doing this at 9 o'clock, okay? And if we can be better about getting in between our dog's eyes, we'll be able to problem solve it better and help them better, okay? So I'm going to talk about why I think Lennox.
And that fear grew into reactivity.
Sorry, let me go back a little bit.
Environment. I've had her for about 5 years. I got her from a kennel daycare organization that kept her in a run for about 2 years of her life. She showed fear at 6 months when we had her, and that fear grew into reactivity, probably as a result of being kept in a kennel environment.
Okay, so right there I kind of speculated as to why she was the way she was. A lot of you that have dogs that were adopted from shelters or were adopted from a previous owner that didn't care for them well, like they were kept out in the backyard their whole life on a chain in a small pen. A lot of the times those dogs have learned to be more reactive. It's a learned behavior, and it's because they weren't able to practice avoidance. So if you're trapped in a cage and things are repeatedly moving by you that you want to get away from and you can't because your cage is so small, that negative emotion is still going to be there. Like the fear-aggressive dog on a leash, right? I want to move away from the boogeyman, but I can't because I'm attached to mom who's attached to a 6-foot leash, but I still have all these negative feelings. If avoiding the scary thing doesn't work, then I'm going to become aggressive, and that normally always works, right? And so that's what happened with Lennox. She came in fearful, not aggressive. She tried to avoid, and she couldn't. For 2 years, she was in a kennel, and she couldn't avoid the scary thing, so she chose to aggress. And every time she jumped up on her kennel door to bark at people, people were like, oh, I'm scared of that dog. I'm going to keep going. And Lennox is like, yes, that works. That went away. And so you can see how that reinforced her idea to be aggressive. Okay? So that's why I think she is that way. Okay. So now we're going to start to go into identifying what we would specifically like our dog to do instead of the nuisance behavior. Okay? This is a really important part, and people tend to overthink it. Really, most people's answer is going to be, I'm okay with my dog doing anything except reacting. The absence of being reactive is everything that's okay with me, right? That is definitely a good answer, but we want to be more detailed, okay? Because if we're more detailed, then we can start to think of different training exercises that the dog can do. So for my reactive clients and for Lennox, one of the things that I want her to do is to look at me when she sees the trigger. I also want her to come back to me. So I want her to look at the trigger and come back to me instead of continue to pull towards that trigger, okay? Those are the two main things that I want her to do. And I'm gonna skip forward here, and you guys are gonna get all these notes, okay? And I just wanted to point this one out because this is an important one. So, for example, this is Lennox. You know, she's reactive towards people and dogs. So this is her offering on her own to come back to me when she sees a person. And you can see her thinking about it. She wants to react, but then she comes back to me instead. So if I can train her to do that, I've solved the reactivity problem, right? And it doesn't have to be a recall, it can just be eye contact back up at me, okay? It can be even more simple than that. It can be just turning your head away or sniffing the grass. And that's another point that we'll talk more about later, is choosing to be more avoidant and to kind of displace stress, talking about that sink, how to cope with the stress, how to drain that sink that you have. I want to try and capture and reinforce all of these avoidance behaviors and these kind of better conflict resolution skills. So instead of coming at a person swinging for no reason, can you just turn away and walk out of the room instead, right? Or can you go and do another activity like smell where that squirrel was, okay? So those are like the really foundational things that we can reinforce. Okay.
So is it actually better to get them to, because I know you want them to focus in on you,
Mm-hmm.
like we were walking the dogs the other night
Mm-hmm.
and there was another
Big German Shepherd.
on the other side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
They started barking. Well, we tried to get their attention, get them both to sit,
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of try to get the energy down, get them to calm down some. They both sat, but
But
we're
they're
both
still
very
fixated
focused
on
and
it.
fixated on that.
Yeah, and a lot of people like to ask their dogs to sit or lay down when their dogs are being reactive, because it's a way for them to have the dog be controlled, right? I think though it's easier for the dog to be successful and therefore you to be successful if we can tap into natural displacement avoidance behaviors that dogs do. So like, for example, if a stray dog met another stray dog and they had conflict, the dog, to try and solve social conflict, would not naturally sit. That's not a normal thing. So when humans ask the dog to do an abnormal skill, it makes it harder for them to become fluent at it. So then I like to think, well, what does a dog normally do to displace stress? If this dog is making this approaching dog uncomfortable, the approaching dog is going to turn to walk away, is going to drop its head down to sniff, is going to look at something else. So, and we'll talk more about those later, but I like to try and make it easier for myself and the dog and just reinforce natural coping skills. Now, in that situation, if the dogs were already peaked and becoming reactive at the German Shepherd, and it's hard for them to naturally choose avoidance, that's where you have to help train them and reinforce avoidance over aggression in that instance. So I'm not saying when you go and walk them tonight by that German Shepherd, they're going to naturally turn away, okay? And that's the tricky point, that's the training point that we'll get into later. That's a good question though. So another step in the problem-solving sequence is identify what you can do to naturally decrease the frequency of the nuisance behavior. This is management and prevention, okay? So for Lennox, I'm not going to walk her in a park full of people on a nice day after school's just let out. Because I know it's going to be a lot for her. At some point in our training, would I try and say, is she ready for this? Yeah, and that's a goal that I work towards, and that's something that I use to gauge success in her. So like, for example, when I first got her, or when I first working with her, I should say, which was about a year ago, she would not be able to walk by one of you in an open field 300 feet away. Now she can, right? But can she do it with a bunch of screaming kids on a playground? I don't think so, right? But that doesn't mean she's not doing better, right? So you have to try and meet your dog where they're at. Some of my reactivity clients speed through a curriculum really well. Other ones take longer because their dog's problems are more severe. Or the dog's handler isn't as good at practicing or isn't as coordinated, right? So this is the management step. This is something you can do right now, today. You can choose to walk your dog instead of in your active neighborhood. You can walk them at 10 o'clock at night when there's not a lot of activity, and you'll get less reactivity because there's just less to bark at. There's less triggers. Okay. So common places that you can walk your dog if your dog is just reactive to other dogs are church campuses, school campuses, and shopping strip areas. Like if your dog just has issues with other dogs, having a playground full of kids is not going to be an issue, right? If your dog is reactive to humans, I love still walking on church campuses. Of course, just not when it's Sunday when everyone's there, right? Because the reason why I like these campuses is because they're so wide open. You can see things coming from a long distance away. There's not a lot of corners that people can all of a sudden poke out of, right? So, and a lot of the behavior training with reactivity is a lot about you being able to control the distance away you are from the trigger. So if you're walking in downtown Birmingham and bam, someone comes around a corner, you're 10 feet away. And your dog, if it's not good at 100 feet away, ain't gonna be good at 10 feet away, right? Okay. The other thing is enrichment, and I talked about that earlier. Freedom of choice is huge because it equals more confidence in yourself, okay? If she can decide whether or not she feels safe enough to venture into the tall grass by that orange safety cone that she's bugged out by, right? If she can control her own proximity towards it, she's going to build in confidence versus me forcing her to do it or me avoiding it altogether. You know, I want to try and let her build in her resiliency in herself to kind of get that sink to deepen, that basin of that sink, remembering that analogy we first thought of. And that's the freedom of choice that you get there. And there's Anthony, other trainer on the team, is so good at enrichment stuff. He has a lot of ideas for that. Okay, this kind of gets into answering your question more specifically. So the last step in this problem-solving framework is identify what I can do to help my dog learn or choose to do a behavior you prefer. So I really highlighted these last two ones because those are the ones that are most important to me. These items are all things that I train in a normal reactivity session with the dog and a client, but the black items can be variable. You can have 5 or you can have 1,000,000, okay? So the overarching concept should be reinforcing avoidance behaviors and reinforcing stress coping behaviors. Yeah?
What do you mean by an offered eye contact versus a cued eye contact?
Offered means the dog's automatically going to do it, and cued means I'm going to ask the dog with a hand signal or a word, and I'll show you videos of that later. And yeah, you made me think of a good point. Offered behaviors is like the dog commits it to muscle memory, like it's a new habit for them. So when we're asking dogs that are reactive and therefore stressed out dogs, if we are saying watch, 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 when the dog is already stressed out because the boogeyman is right over there, that's entering the ear and ricocheting right off, right? And it's probably adding more stress because someone's nitpicking you. Watch, watch, watch. And so the dog gets more and more agitated. And so I like to train offered behaviors because I don't have to say or do anything, right? The dog is naturally chosen to do the behavior for me. It sounds like magic, it looks like magic, but it's really easy. And I'll show you a video on how to do that later. And I just wanted to give you avoidance behaviors. You have the head turn, so like this dog, the black and white dog, probably had a social interaction with another dog that made it nervous, and so it's trying to go like, I don't want to talk to you right now, so I'm just going to go over here, right? And then a dog walking away. So if you guys made me uncomfortable, I could get up and walk out of this room right now, and my stress level immediately declined, right? And so these are all things that dogs do if they have the freedom to do so. Common stress coping behaviors are body shakes and sniffing. So anytime my dog is in a stressful situation and chooses to shake her body instead of bark, I reward it. I yes and treat. If anytime my dog chooses to drop her head and sniff, I yes and treat the sniffing. And when we're talking about stress coping behaviors, and I'll go through a lot of the different ones in that long video, that's me and Lennox at the park. We can artificially create our dogs to do some stress coping behaviors. It's hard to train a dog to body shake. It's easy to get a dog to sniff. So one of my favorite things to do is to just for the treat, instead of giving treat to the mouth, I say yes and I throw food on the ground. So they have to sniff for it. And so then what do? You get a dog that sees a trigger and then goes to sniff. And at some point in the training process, I don't even have to have food there, because guess what? It's naturally reinforcing to avoid conflict, right? The absence of that dog or that person not coming towards them because we sniffed feels good. And I don't always have to have food from now on, okay? That's a really important point. Does everyone understand that one? Okay. All right, so now we're gonna talk more about, okay, that's the slide just kind of underscores what I just said. And a lot of times people are like, well, what if my dog doesn't like to eat? If your dog doesn't like to eat in non-stressful situations, so like in your house, doesn't really have a big appetite, which Lennox doesn't really have a good food drive. If they don't like to eat in your house and they don't like to eat out in public, you don't just have food as a reward. Moving away from the boogeyman is its own reward, right? Me moving away from you guys, if I feel like you guys are making me uncomfortable, is reinforcing, okay? All right, we also want to do good with impulse control stuff. This is really good for dogs that have predatory issues. And something that I like to think of while I'm working with a reactive dog is, where would my dog be if they were off leash? Would they be running towards that? Yeah, and if you know that they're going that way, that means that we got to do something differently, because we want to try and get the dog below threshold, it's what it's called. I want to try and get Obi or Iris to where they are 300 feet away from the trigger, to where they're not even going to go after them. They're going to stick by me. And then we systematically try and bring them to where they're 10 feet away, to where they're no longer going to have the impulse to bolt. Okay, so this is the offered eye contact exercise, and I'm not going to play every video, but in this presentation, which I'm going to email you all, there will be instructional videos that we send to our clients that you can look through. Offered eye contact is where we present the dog a problem, and that problem is going to be, we have food or their favorite toys out of reach. So the dog is on the ground and our toys are out of reach. This is very similar to a dog that's being reactive, for the frustrated greeters and the predatory ones, right? They want to rush towards that thing, and they can't because they're on a leash. That is a problem for them. So we're mimicking the same problem of not being able to gain access to a resource that they want. So they're practicing self-control and impulse control while a resource is being held out of reach. The only way he gets the treats in my hand is if he looks at me on his own. And I'm going to show you that so that you guys can see what that looks like. But we're not going to watch the whole thing, just because I talk too much in it.
Frustrated. We're not going to give. We're going to say that realizes that. So you'll see in this clip of me and Max that we're doing that same thing. I'm putting the treat to his nose, whipping my hands out, and waiting for him to look at me. When he does, I say yes and give him a treat.
He's really good at this because he's also one of my dogs. But normally dogs that are fresh on this, they'll look at one of your hands, so that's the hard part. He's kind of like going like this and going right back up at me. And you notice how I wasn't saying anything except for yes and treat. Well, you didn't hear me in the video, but all I'm doing is going like this, waiting for him to look at me, and then saying yes and giving him the food. I'm not saying watch or anything like that. This is another favorite exercise that I do. I train and offer recall at the end of a tight leash. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because reactive dogs pull towards the thing, right? And so if I can train them that the physical sensation they feel on their harness or collar of them pulling to come back to me, I've solved leash pulling, and I've also solved them continuing to aggress towards the thing. And I've also reinforced avoidance behavior, so them turning away from the scary thing back into me. And this is really easy to do. So you're tossing a treat out in front of the dog, and you're waiting for the dog to turn around and come back to you, and you treat from your side. And then so long as it's safe, the dog can walk back to the resource that they were pulling at in the first place. Of course, if you had a reactive dog, you wouldn't want the dog to go and greet the dog that they're aggressing towards. That would come much later on in the reactivity training. So you're tossing a favorite toy or food out of their reach so that they pull, and then you wait for them to come back around to you. And so eventually the treat that you're tossing up in front of the dog would become that dog or the person that they're reacting to in the environment. And that's what you saw in that video of Lennox pulling towards the lawn worker and then coming back to me.
It's almost like almost like a rubber band.
Yeah,
where they
very
get to
much.
That sensation that it's, I'm pulling,
Mhm.
it's going to be comfortable to go back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's what you want. You want to go and then back. And it'll get to the point where, especially if you introduce it with triggers. So like Ira's seeing a dog 200 feet away. She's pulling and then she comes back, and you keep repeating that over and over. I'm talking 100 times. It'll get to the point where she sees a dog and knows what to do. She comes back around to you. She won't always pull every time. You see what I'm saying? Okay, the other good game is called the gravity game. This is a very passive game. I love it. You can sit and scroll on your Facebook and just sit down and play this game with your dog. And it's similar to the offered recall at the end of a tight leash, except we're flirting with the idea of the dog practicing this new behavior when they see all these other triggers. So this is a dog that has a lot of anxieties, lots of reactivity, and she is at a boarding kennel. There's dogs in this play yard right here, and then there's going to be the owner of this facility's dog is off leash running up this barn. And so what we're going to do with her is I have her on a long line, and I let her go out to observe the trigger so long as she's under threshold. I wouldn't want her to start having a panic attack. I let her go out and close distance when she sees the other dog, but I don't allow her to move any closer, and I wait for her to come back around to me, and I reinforce her for that. So I let her go out and get distracted, like she's looking at the people at this barn right here, and then I wait for her to turn around and give me focus. This is an exercise where, again, you're like, what would my dog do if she wasn't on a leash? Would she be looking at the thing and continuing to run towards it, or would she be sticking close to me? This game creates a dog that's going to want to stick close to you. That's why it's called the gravity game. You're their center of gravity. And the long line simulates that off-leashness. And this is also freedom of choice, right? Are you going to choose to continue to get worked up, or are you going to come back around to me? If you do come back around to me, I'm going to give you the reward, and then also reward you by being able to go out in your environment again. I love this one. It's really easy. Another one is the emergency U-turn. So this is when your dog goes over threshold, because it will happen. So you're walking up, you're too close, explosive, bark, 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 and then you practice turning the dog away. That's avoidance. So we just kind of led the dog to do an avoidance behavior, and we reinforced her for it. So this is other dog. Your dog is getting above threshold. You recognize it. You say turn, and you pull the dog in the other direction. And you reinforce them for that turn.
You're actually pulling on the leash now?
Yeah. When it first starts. Yeah. So you're pulling on the leash, and you say, and it's a gradual pressure. The dog would be reacting, and you'd say, Fiona, turn, 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 turn. And if you had to, you'd physically pull them away. Because you don't want them to get closer, right? Because that's when fireworks may happen. But when you practice it enough, the dog should start to whip around and do the turn when you first say turn. Yeah. This is when the dog's over threshold. So this is when you push it too far. That's why it's called an emergency U-turn. Okay. All right. And so eventually, with lots and lots of practice, you get a dog that's going to choose all of these behaviors that you've reinforced without having to have treats. This is a long video, too long for me to play for you. I'll kind of talk over it while it's playing. But she will, like right now I'm waiting because she's starting to climb in arousal. There's lots of dogs that stick out from a trailhead right here. I don't allow her to advance dragging me because she's just a snowball coming down a snowy cliff, and it's just going to snowball bigger and bigger and turn into an avalanche, right? So I stop and wait for that impulse control, her check-in with me, and her reward for that check-in isn't food. It's being able to advance more forward in that environment. But you have to have control over your emotions before you can advance. Because a lot of these reactive dogs love taking in everything, right? And so I can use that as a reward for more calm, impulse-controlled behavior. So you don't always have to have treats with you. Okay, we're almost done. After going through all of those steps, we can put it all together in that big long video that's 30 minutes. And I encourage you guys to watch that later. I narrate the whole thing, and it allows you to see me problem solve things. I do all the things that I just showed you, including an emergency U-turn when Lennox got over threshold. Okay, so it's a really nice video. And then in the last 10 minutes, I want to talk about training tools. It's really tempting for people that have reactive dogs to get more punitive training collars because they're frustrated, and they think a solution to your dog's reactivity is simply censoring the barking behavior. So a lot of times people with reactive dogs will buy a prong collar or a shock collar, and they'll administer that punishment when the dog barks, and they'll get a dog that doesn't bark anymore. Have you removed the barking? Yeah. Have you removed the underlying emotional reaction? No. You've probably made it worse. It's like me getting slapped by my mom if some stranger was trying to hug me and I told them I don't want you to, right? So it can appear to be a quick fix, but it's not. The other thing is a retractable leash. If you have a reactive dog with a retractable leash, a lot of these dogs have ripped these leashes out of people's hands. The leashes have broken because the locking mechanism isn't as strong. So I don't recommend retractable leashes for these guys. I also recommend a nice tight body harness. I like the Freedom harnesses. They have 2 points of attachment for you to feel even more confident that they're not going to back out of it. For really big dogs and small handlers, I recommend a head collar. All of the pressure goes on their nose, so they can't use their muscles as well to pull you and drag you. You also have more control over their face. So if an off-leash dog were to come, you could steer your dog's head around and you'd be able to prevent biting. No-slip collars are huge for fearful dogs. A lot of the tiny ones slip out, and these no-slip collars have a tightening thing right here that if they skittish backwards, it tightens up so they can't get out. And then if your dog has an aggravated bite history, I would use a basket muzzle, but most people don't need those basket muzzles. Things that I always carry with me is an air horn in case I do get an off-leash dog. I don't carry an air horn so that I can walk in areas that have lots of off-leash dogs, right? Because when I blow my air horn, I also scare my dog. I just use it for an added layer of security. So if I walk in a place that I know has leash laws, or walk in a place that has leash laws that I know are obeyed, I still carry an air horn, okay? A jar of pennies can also work. These are all sounds that scare dogs. You can also open up an umbrella as a shield, and then also just like a visual blocker as well. But I like the air horn the best. And then it's all about teamwork. So a lot of people with reactive dogs send their dogs away to boot camp. That doesn't work. It works for the dog and the trainer that you're paying thousands of dollars for them to work with. But when they give the dog back to you, you don't know how to handle them. Even after the 1 hour presentation they give you, it's not enough. Working with a reactive dog requires lots of skill in reading body language, lots of coordination, lots of just good observational skills, and those are all things that a 1 hour session with the trainer can't get you. So try not to be duped on those. It's all these three things: your skills mechanically, all the different activities you're teaching them, the offer eye contact, the recall stuff, motivational stuff. So how can I reinforce my dog to practice behavior pattern B instead of A? Behavior pattern A is the reactivity that comes naturally to them. How can I motivate them to do this other behavior? And then it's also a trust factor. step number one is to make your dog feel safe. So you want to try and set them up to be in a safe area so that they can perform from that foundation.
I have a question about
Yeah.
working with them and the whole thing about making them feel safe.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've noticed is that when we're going to an area that the dogs are familiar with,
Mhm.
that they go to on a regular basis, there
Yeah.
tends to be a little bit of kind of a
Territorialness.
territorialness.
Like they've
About
decided
it?
the entire backside of the dog park is theirs.
Yeah. Is it better to take them to different areas, which would give them different sights, different sounds, smells, different things to be around that might pique their interest rather than, say, the dog
Yeah.
lives across the street or...
So for my reactivity clients, I like to practice all of these behaviors in a new area. So long as the dog is okay with being in a new area. I worked with one German Shepherd who was shut down at this neutral spot that I practice at. And so because of that, I had to go to her house to make her feel safe. The reason why I like to go to new places, and Obi and Iris might do this at this spot, is because in their neighborhood, they've practiced this behavior. So if in that spot on the dog park, that's where a lot of pedestrian traffic or other dogs or cars go by, that's a hot spot. And so that's an area where they're going to continue to practice that behavior. The front gate of the dog park is another area where lots of practice aggressive behavior happens. And I've worked with dogs that they're fine, 3 houses, and then the 4th house, that's when they start to peak because they're so used to that backyard dog barking at the fence. Even if it's inside, they still act like it because they assume it's going to be there because they practice it so much. So I guess the long answer to your question is, or the short answer rather, is I'd have to watch it happen and observe that space. And then recommend, you taking them to a new area. If they practice that same behavior in a new area, then I would say, it is a territorial thing. If they don't, then I would say they've just practiced that one behavior at that one spot.
Like yesterday, we went
Cahaba
yesterday
Beach.
afternoon to
Oh, yeah.
Cahaba Beach Dog Park.
Uh-huh.
We were in the back, and there's a German short hair that just runs laps at the park. That's all it does.
Mhm.
And it was running, and as it started to run towards the back, Iris took off after it.
Uh-huh.
And she didn't
She
like
didn't attack
engage
him.
with the dog,
Yeah.
but
She
it was almost
growled.
like this is my area.
Okay.
And then she immediately turned and went back to Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to talk to you more about that one later to give you a better answer then. That's a hard one for me to say for sure right now.
It's like they get very confrontational with
Okay.
every dog.
Yeah.
Like if they're back there by themselves,
Yeah, they're
and
fine.
new dogs come in, even though it's a dog park, they'll get, kind of
Yeah.
confrontational.
Okay. All right, and then I just need to say that even though I send you all these videos and stuff, you can try them by yourself, but it's always best to do it under the guide of someone. I know dog training is expensive, so that's why I became a dog trainer, so that I wouldn't have to pay to help my dogs. So yeah, just a word of caution with all of that, okay? Again, I'm going to email you this whole presentation for you guys to have. If you have any questions about anything in it, just feel free to reach out to me and let me know, okay? Yeah.
Any advice on barking in her car seat? Or just crying? Or just yelling? I mean,
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's another one, again, that I'm going to have to see if you can take a video of it safely. I'd love to see that, the whole process from when you go out your door to the car, to turning the car on, to driving. Having video footage or just having me go on a drive with you one day would provide me a lot of insight to see.
Really?
'Cause
So
there
it's
can-
like step-by-step thing that she
Because-
probably gets fearful before we even open the door?
Yeah, it's so environment drives behavior. Okay, so I have to be able to think: is the barking something that happens? Not the barking, the emotional response that's causing the barking, right? Is it a hesitancy to be in the car? Is it when the car engine turns on? Is it when you round the corner and she sees, I don't know, the kids playing? It's a lot of different variables that maybe we could arrive at in a conversation, but it's best if I see the whole process so I can start to see when she starts to be uncomfortable, because she might be doing things before the barking happens.
Okay.
Yeah. If you guys have other questions, feel free to stay a little bit later to ask. If you don't, you guys are welcome to go. I have all your emails except yours, Justin, but I think Rebecca can give it to me, or you can write it down on this piece of paper before you leave. Okay? Thank you all for coming so much. I appreciated it. I'm out at Buck Creek Park walking my reactive dog Lennox. She's reactive to people and dogs and cars that slow down. She's reactive to sounds as well. So she's very, very sensitive to lots of things in her environment. I've had her for about 5 years. I got her from a kennel daycare organization that kept her in a run for about 2 years of her life. She showed fear at 6 months when they had her, and that fear grew into reactivity, probably as a result of being kept in a kennel environment. I've been working with her on this reactivity for probably 12 to 18 months, almost every day. That I have her out on a walk, I'm working with her on it. You can see that this space is very, very wide open. It's like a sports complex. On this side of the park, there's very little activity. On the other side of the park, there's lots of activity. There's people and dogs and kids out sometimes. I like choosing these places to work with reactive dogs because I feel like the difference in the sides of the park allow me to really control the amount of triggers that I expose her to, and it's at a distance that I feel is pretty much stable. By that I mean people on the other side of the park are normally always going to be in a circular walking path or on a playground there. So it's rare that they are going to come towards me, and so I'm able to be the one to control the distance between Lennox and those triggers. And when we're working with reactivity, specifically when we're doing behavior modification with reactivity, doing those training sessions, the ability to control the distance and the density of those distractions, the triggers, are going to be very important. Training environment setup is everything. You'll notice that I'm going to switch the screen. You'll notice that I have Lennox on a normal harness, and I have her on a very long leash. It's really important for reactive dogs to have very, very, very regular, at least half-hour walks where they're able to make all the decisions that they want, so long as it's safe. So on this side of the park that has very little activity, I'm letting her smell whatever she wants to smell, I'm letting her go wherever she wants to go, and I'm more or less following her. This allows her to feel more confident because I'm giving her the power of choice. So she is able to move towards something or away from something if she wants. I think this is something that's very empowering for dogs. And you'll see how practicing her making choices over here where the stakes aren't as high is going to carry through when we move our way over here to the other side of the park where there are more triggers. Now I've worked with her again for 12 to 18 months, working up foundational skills. So what you're going to see from her today is going to be a result of lots of regular practice. I'm talking 6 days a week I've worked with her on this. While we're watching Lennox walk over to the other side of the park, I'm going to try and go through some of those foundational exercises. The first thing that you want to train is a marker word. A marker word is similar to a clicker. So it's a sound that captures the behavior that you want. It's one of the most fundamental ways that you can communicate with your dog that they've done something right, and that allows us to gain traction in a lot of the other kinds of behaviors that we're training. Lennox's marker word is yes. She's afraid of the clicker, and I was trained to use the word yes as opposed to good or any other kind of marker word. So when I say yes, it has meaning. I say it in a certain inflection too. I say yes! And you see how she gave me a head turn there, because I've conditioned her to that word yielding something great. And the something great that I like to use when we're first training a behavior is food, because it's something that most all dogs will readily eat. If your dog doesn't have a good food drive, it's probably because they're stressed, and or they're what I call a kibble millionaire, so they're able to eat anything and everything that they want, and so they're never really wanting for food. So I have very high value treats here. They're her favorite kind. It's called Bill Jack, and you'll notice that I'm always carrying around my treat pouch with me. In my treat pouch, I have those treats, and you can also see a foghorn. Foghorn is in case an emergency happens, like in case I encounter a loose dog. I can use the foghorn to scare that dog away. So this is my little setup here, right? Okay, so going back to using food as a reinforcer. So I conditioned her that the word yes equals treat. Yes, treat, yes, treat. And I train her this in my house, not out here.
Time, 1 hour. Distance, 1.51 miles.
Tracker going. So I train her with the word yes inside of my house. And I want a dog to head swivel and look at me when they hear the word yes. So after I train the dog yes, I'm able to lay down communication of those fundamental skills that I'm working on are paying out. So let's talk more about some of those fundamental skills. Fundamental skill number 1 is reinforcing offered eye contact. And the kind of offered eye contact that I like to train for is offered eye contact at the end of a tight leash. So kind of like what she's doing right now. It's a tight leash, so I'm not going to move forward until she turns around and looks at me. When she turns around and looks at me, I say yes, and I drop my hand down really quick to give her a treat. And then I also reinforce her by allowing her to continue to move forward in her environment. This offered eye contact, yes, come on, is a great game to play when you're out in park settings like this. Stay on the periphery of the park on your normal lead, and have her go out at the end, stop when she's pulling, and just wait for her to turn around and look at you. And dogs will turn around and look at you out of mild frustration. They want to move forward, and they look around and you're like, Mom, why can't I move forward anymore? And the answer to that question is, you can't move forward anymore because I need you to take notice of me first and come back to me. I call this game the gravity game as well. It's a grounding exercise, it's a relaxation exercise, it's an engagement exercise. And oftentimes reactive dogs are reactive because they're impulsive. They're impulsive because I think they have a lot of anxiety, and they also tend to have a very, 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 very energetic brain. I think a byproduct of an energetic brain is a lot of anxiety. So teaching them impulse control skills, grounding skills, engagement skills are going to be really, really important. I never want a dog that has reactivity to move forward in their environment unless they're in a very calm state like this. I think a lot of the times, Lennox, dogs are not going to do well greeting other dogs or people because they're in an aroused state. So if I can kind of reinforce and maintain criteria for a more relaxed dog, their interactions with the world are going to be a lot better. And this is a relaxed dog right here. So we're going to reward that by moving forward in the environment. I'm going to start to go this way. And as we move this way, there's gonna be a lot more people present. So I am again going to let Lennox steer me here. I'm gonna gather my long line up a little bit. Come on, Lennox. And I let her steer to a degree. We can't walk that way into the main road, so I've just steered her over here. And the freedom of choice is still going to happen here. Lennox is still going to be able to let me know if, yes, that's another thing. Anytime your dog gives you eye contact, you make sure to reinforce it. You want it? Good job. Come on. So, freedom of choice, continuing here. I want her to feel like she is in control of choosing whether or not she approaches a trigger or doesn't approach a trigger. Now, of course, if she chooses to approach a trigger, I'm not going to actually let her come up to them to where they could physically touch her. That's not a goal that I have with reactive dogs. My goal is simply to be able to walk past them without losing your mind. So when we're walking over to this more trigger dense area, I'm gonna see if she chooses avoidance. Yes, on her own. Come here, babe. If she chooses avoidance on her own, or if she chooses to continue to snowball up in that emotional state of mind and that high arousal. Over the past 12 to 18 months with her, I've tried to reinforce avoidance behavior and tried to prevent aggression. Reactivity is aggression. Aggression is barking, lunging, snarling at people, and it's a way for them to attempt to communicate to that thing, hey, I need distance, back up. And in a lot of dogs' cases that have chosen to be aggressive instead of avoidant, when they're faced with their triggers, they have chosen to be more aggressive because they haven't been able to choose avoidance. In Lennox's case, it was likely because she was kept in a kennel for 2 years of her life. That kennel space was not large enough for her to choose avoidance. So she chose to aggress. And wouldn't you know it, it probably worked just about 99% of the time. She would lunge up at her kennel and growl when a person came by or a dog came by, and they would just keep walking. So she was reinforced for that aggression. In her mind, that made the scary thing go away. So she's going to continue to do that behavior because it worked. So when we work with the reactive dogs, we're trying to redefine what to do in that situation. Yes, come on. And so what I want her to learn from her environment is that even if she doesn't choose to be aggressive with her triggers, the triggers are going to go away with avoidance. Not everyone is going to want to come and pet your dog. And even if they did want to pet their dog, yes, I would tell them, no, you can't. And so them not coming to pet her while she's choosing to be avoidant is reinforcing for her. Because remember, reactive dogs don't want the attention from the thing that they're barking at. They want distance. So if that person gives them distance while the dog chooses to be avoidant, I'm going to let the dog do that, and I'm going to allow the person in the environment to continue to give the dog what they want, which is that distance. Yes, good girl. So what are some avoidance behaviors? Avoidance behaviors include looking away, turning away, what's another one? Coming, like just literally walking away. Sniffing is more of a displacement behavior. Licking is a displacement behavior. Itching is a displacement behavior. And so of all those behaviors, I try and think which ones can I manipulate? So which ones can I make the dog do? And one of the things that I can really easily make the dog do is look away. So looking away is something that we get from that offered eye contact, right? When Lennox sees a trigger, and they're going to be coming up soon, so you'll start to see that she pulls more intensely on this leash. Yes, good girl. When she pulls intensely on that leash, she is cued to turn around and look at me like she did, based off of that gravity game behavior that we practiced. So, I am training an avoidance behavior while practicing that gravity game. And so now I'm linking it to, you see the trigger, normally you pull, yes, because you're reactive, but guess what? I've reinforced this alternative behavior of you turning around and coming to me at the end of that tight leash, which is also, you guessed it, an avoidance behavior. That avoidance behavior works. You do not have to react at these people over here to make them go away. You avoiding and simply just walking past them also works. Yes. And all the while that I'm walking, if she turns around and looks at me and gives me focus, I'm going to reinforce that. Now, I don't know if you can see all these people over here, but normally this would have Lennox go nutso. She would be really reactive to all of this. And again, I'm letting her choose where she wants to go. Now, Lennox struggles more with dogs than she does people. I want you to start to watch her body language here. There's a person with a dog over there, and then there's a person running. The person running, moving faster, is going to be harder for Lennox to take in. The dog is going to be harder for Lennox to take in. It's because I know that. I'm gonna try and help her out here. I want to make her aware that a dog is over there. So I'm going to cue it by saying, "What is it?" She's seen it. You see her ears perk up. She's huffing a little bit. Now let's see what she does. She turns away. Yes, good girl. So I reinforce that with food. She doesn't want it, probably because she's a little bit high off her emotions. So we turn around and wait. Now when she turned around at me, I followed through and continued to turn. Now when this person comes out, yes, good girl. So her reinforcement is walking away. Now when this person pops up from behind these cars and she sees the dog, it might be harder for her. Yes, good girl, but she turned away. Look at that. She went back because it's hard. Yes, good girl. She turned away. Now in this moment, yes, good girl. She might not want food because she's hot. Oh, she did. Yes. Because she's hot. And that dog is also kind of stressful for her. So sometimes dogs' appetite goes down. Sometimes it goes up though. So she's climbing. There's a car approaching too. So that's trigger stacking. I want you to watch her tail. She's starting to get amped. Yes, but she decided to turn away. Good girl. She was climbing there. She caught herself. Now if she hadn't have caught herself, I would have had to intervene and try and that body shake is awesome too. That's a relief of stress. And she's moving away. Do you see that? She's like pulling me away, which is awesome. This is a restroom, so I don't want someone to pop out of that door. Come on in. Oh, there's a person coming out of a car. Yes, good girl. You see the turn away and the sniff to displace that stress. I was gonna say this is a restroom and I don't want someone to pop out of that door in the restroom and surprise her, so I didn't allow her to choose to go that way. I had her go behind the building. So again, I'm letting her drive here. She was off leash. What would she be doing? Would she be charging over here? She would be right now, not charging, but walking. Come here, Lynn. And there's another small dog she hasn't seen yet, so I'm gonna prepare her for it. Lennox, what is it? She saw it. Watch her body language. Guy is running too. That's really hard. You see, because it's hard, she started to lunge. So what I'm going to do to help her out is turn away. Lennox, come on. Yes, good girl. And she's still stuck. Come on, let's go. So I'm going to help her with that avoidance. Come on, let's go. Good job. Come on, Lennox. She's still stuck. Do you see? Come on, Len. Good. So she got really high off her emotions. Now, as I walk away, you see her keep checking in. We'll see if she can digest it better. Yes! So she just made the decision to move away and avoid it instead of aggress towards it. It started with aggression. She needed to see that body shake to alleviate stress. That's also really good. She chose aggression at first because it was too much for her. If that guy wasn't running with the dog, she probably would have done a lot better. But since he was running, it was really hard. And so it was too much for her. She went over threshold and she needed mom's help. So I gave it to her. And after I helped her, she did better with that distance though too. That distance was really important. And I wanted to show her that when we move away, and you choose avoidance, not choose, but when I ask for avoidance and you do avoidance behavior, it works. Like that dachshund and that man still went away. Now we're gonna come up on the same people again. This guy has his dachshund on a extendable lead. I hate extendable leashes. So we are going to make sure we stay at least 20 feet away. Now notice Lennox is pulling me right now. Because Lennox is pulling me and I know this dachshund is coming up to this trailhead right here, I'm gonna stop and wait to get more of a calm behavior from her because she's still too high. So we're gonna play the gravity game here. She doesn't know that dachshund is over there. So I'm gonna help her out. There she goes. You see that alert stance right there? She's seen it. She's at least scanning for it. I don't think she's actually seen the dachshund yet. So we're just playing gravity game here. We're letting her get lost. And we're reinforcing the more calm behavior. The turning around, body shaking, she's starting to come off of that stress. She's a little bit less intense. She just saw that dachshund.
Time,
there.
1 hour, 15 minutes.
good
Distance,
girl.
1.86 miles.
Yes, good girl. Nice job. And we're gonna see if she wants to eat. She did. She's going back in. The dachshund's gonna be closer, so it's gonna be harder. So what's she gonna do? She's gonna pull on that leash. Yes, good girl, Lynn. And turn around and look at me. Good job. So this is the same dachshund that she struggled with in the parking lot. She just looked over her shoulder there at it. Yes, good girl. She's still very much aware that dog is there. Yes! So it's right there. I don't think you can really see it that well. Yes, still very much aware. That guy was running with the dachshund. That's the same thing that she struggled with. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is where does Lennox choose to go? Does she choose to go forward? Because now I'm not restricting the leash at all. This is what would Lennox do if she was off leash in this situation. She just thought about reacting again and chose not to, and now she's walking away. So I reinforce that with food since she's got an appetite. And we're also going to continue to walk away from the thing that lit her up. That's a double reinforcement there. Paid her with food, paid her with distance away from the trigger. I don't believe that nature would really design any dog to be as anxious as Lennox is around other dogs, specifically of her own species or people. Okay, we got a guy on a lawnmower coming up. And I was saying all that to say, let's see how she does. What is it? She hasn't seen it? Yes, Lenny. Good girl. Okay. I say all that to say that, come on, let's go. Nature wouldn't design a dog to be aggressive towards their own species all the time. Aggression has its place in communication. It's a dog's way to communicate negative feedback. And just like people shouldn't be expected to be happy and complicit with everything that happens to them, I don't think dogs should be either. The issue is that when you're super aggressive, in situations like this, very normal situations where you're not being accosted, where that other trigger is not saying, hey, let's have a conflict, and Lennox brings the conflict so frequently, that sets her up for failure as an organism. that's going to invite a lot more fights. It's going to invite a lack of trust, and she's not going to benefit from the social relationships that she has with other dogs. I think that dogs like Lennox have suffered from environmental trauma, as Lennox has. They also sometimes, I think often suffer from being predisposed genetically to having a brain that is more anxious. She's a cattle dog mix. Cattle dogs are selectively bred to be very intense. And so I think when people have selectively bred dogs for certain utilities, like German Shepherds as guard dogs, for example, they set them up to be more prone to feeling stress, to being more anxious. And so I think Lennox genuinely does suffer from some type of mental dysfunction. If she was a human being and she went to a psychiatrist, I imagine that she would be diagnosed with generalized anxiety and some kind of intermittent rage disorder. And so she needs therapy. Therapy is this, but you have to do it every day to make them feel better, because in her mind, in her brain, being reactive and explosive makes more sense. And unfortunately, her environment, her history, and practicing that behavior has always worked. So I have to come in and reinforce this alternative behavior pattern and make an argument to Lennox and say, hey, choosing avoidance instead of aggression works too. And that's the hard thing, right, Len? Reactive dogs can be very frustrating, but they also can teach you so much. I am eternally grateful and thankful for everything that this little dog has taught me. It requires a lot of empathy and patience and compassion and teamwork, but I swear once you get there, it's gonna feel amazing. I hope this helped you guys. I look forward to hearing your questions. Bye.